we are going to jump right in with this beautiful heart cut out piece. I told you I had a bunch of them, and they were actually going to be part of a video I did all in one shot last week for my Rustic collab, but I didn't get to everything, and so this one's going to get a whole different look. I had gotten this piece at the thrift store. It was a couple of dollars. And as you can see, there's some parts where it was clearly on a wall and somebody must have painted the wall. And there was these parts of latex paint still stuck on there. So I did take it out to my sander so that I could get it sanded. I'm using a 180 grit sandpaper because that's what I have available. And I'm going to focus on those edges, but I am going to sand the entire piece. I was originally going to use milk paint, but I decided to switch things up and I came in with a chalk paint by Dixie Belle. This is the color Drop Cloth. I gave this piece 2 coats and let that dry. To cover up that heart, I am using a casting from the Frames mold. It is the little one that was in the center on the left. And I am going to use some Titebond Quick and Thick and glue it right on. I was back and forth about whether or not to cover up the hole where the nail was, but I ended up deciding to cover it. I then got some painter's tape and just taped down the casting so that it would stay in place while it dried. I decided to embellish this piece with some of the paint inlays from the Petit Fleurs Red IOD Paint Inlay set. This has 4 pages of a variety of different inlays that are perfect for not only large but also small pieces. The first part is going to come in this little desk part of this thing. I kind of think that this was up on a wall to be by like a phone. Like I almost wonder if a phone was kind of on the inside of this, and that was like a place to hold a notepad, and then there's a little hole for a pen. I mean, you guys can let me know. It also looks like underneath it there's a place that you could put either book or I don't know what else would be able to fit under there. Anyway, I am using my Dixie Belle chalk paint in the color Drop Cloth, and I am painting a 3rd coat, and while it is still wet, I am going to take that paint inlay, which I have also misted, and lay it face down on to the spot where I'd like to adhere that inlay. Then I gently smooth it down, and then I use a microfiber cloth to wipe up any of the excess water that had been on the inlay, and also just to make sure that I am pressing it down evenly across the piece. I repeat this step on both of the sides of this piece, adding in a little rose on each side. While I let the paint inlays dry, I am going to paint the front of this piece again. I keep calling it a piece because I have no idea what to call it. And I am going to just make sure that it is fully coated and also paint that casting that we had glued onto the front. I'm going to use some Rub and Buff in the color Grecian Gold, and I'm going to cover the entire frame on this casting and then do almost like a dry brush in the middle. After that was dry, I added in this little transfer to the middle of this frame. For our next project, I have this little pencil holder that was, I guess, hand-carved, handmade, to look like a little desk, like a vintage desk. And it does have some heart cutouts too. It also used to have a little apple on it. That's what I'm showing you right there. But it fell off when I got it. This was something I picked up at the thrift store for less than $2. And I think anything that looks like school related, I always pick up because I work in the schools. And so it just speaks to me. I'm going to start by painting this piece in Rustic Red, which is a Dixie Belle paint. It is a chalk paint. One thing I want to let you know about these inlays is that you can actually use them more than one time. You may already know this, but if you're new to paint inlays, I do want to make sure that you are aware of that. Once you use them once, make sure you set them out to dry and you can reuse them 2 to 3 times. I believe I've heard that some people can use them up to 4. I usually don't get a really good adherence, I guess, on the 4th try. So usually I'll use them 2 to 3 times. I am going to paint this little desk in 1 coat of this paint, and then we're going to come back and use a different color chalk paint that's a little lighter so we can see how that inlay looks when it is used the second time. This is Dixie Belle chalk paint in the color drop cloth again. This is the same paint that I used in the last piece that we did, and I'm going to give it 2 coats and then come back and start the inlay process. The piece that I laid on the surface on the other project we just did, I actually snipped it so that it would be the exact size I need to go across this little desk, and then I was going to use the extra little pieces along the sides. I am going to do the exact same method, putting my chalk paint layer on. You do want it to be a little bit more generous, I guess. I always start doing thin coats because that's how I'm used to painting. But when you are doing an inlay, you do want it to be a little bit more generous than a thin coat because you want to make sure that the paint that's on the inlay is able to really adhere to the paint that's on the piece. I set that aside for about an hour to dry, and now I misted it, or I dampened it a little bit with my cloth, and I am pulling back the inlay to reveal the second time that I've used it and what that looks like. You can see that it is much lighter. It looks a little bit more dull. It almost looks like this piece has been sitting around for a while, right? And the paint is starting to chip off because parts of that inlay will look a little bit more stark or like the original color, and then other parts of it will look a little bit more dull or aged. I am now coming in with my damp cloth and just doing some wet distressing around it. I also come in with a sander to do some regular sanding to kind of give a variety of texture and chippiness to this piece because we are going to age it up once this is done. This is Fusion's Antiquing Glaze, and I am going to cover the entire piece with this Antiquing Glaze, allowing it to set for a few minutes and then wiping back the excess with my microfiber cloth. What you will see on the front of this little desk, or where that seat is that when I was sanding, some of the layers of paint are now visible. You can see some of the red, you see obviously the drop cloth, and then you see the original wood that is underneath all of the paint layers. That is exactly what I wanted this to look like. Before I added this Antiquing Glaze, I forgot to mention this, and it is not filmed, but I did cover the entire piece with a Polycrylic Sealer, which will allow that Antiquing Glaze to kind of wipe back a little bit more easily. I also wanted to make sure I sealed my inlay. I also forgot to tell you, and I forgot to show this on camera, but I filled in those 2 heart cutouts on the sides of this little table. I love finding wood pieces at the thrift store that are unique and random. This little wood elephant was adorable, and I immediately picked it up when I found it. It was only a couple of dollars, and I'm going to start out by painting it in a coat of Prom Queen by DIY. One of the things that I wanted to illustrate in today's video is how many different kinds of paints or brands of paints you can use with these paint inlays. I know that the first 2 were Dixie Belle paints, which is a chalk paint. You know that chalk paints need to be sealed, and so that's the type of paint I will typically use with paint inlays. This is a DIY paint, also needs to be sealed. It is a clay-based paint. So I am going to paint this little elephant in 1 coat of this Prom Queen. On that second coat, we will do our inlay process, which I didn't show you for this project, but I do want to show you the big reveal. I've got my damp rag and I am dampening the inlay and pulling it back to reveal the paint that is now adhered to this elephant. I will say that most of these pieces on this elephant have already been used once before, but I didn't want to show you that because the last project today is huge and very special. So I wanted to show you this, and then we're going to move on to another time where I'll be using this exact same inlay for the first time. For our last project today, I have this adorable kids rocking chair that I gotten at the Goodwill bins for like $5 to $7. I have painted this already, and I'm just going to give it one more coat of a white paint. I am using a different chalk paint by Vintiques. I will make sure it's in the description box. I did get it off of Amazon, and I'm going to be using the paint inlay with this paint this time. Before I do that, I am going to quickly sand this entire rocking chair down just to help it look a little bit more aged. For this project, I'll be using the Lattice Rose IOD Paint Inlay. It is a 12 by 16 pad, and this is the piece that I'll be using from this set, the one that has the kind of frames around the roses. And here it is. The first step in this process is to cut down this paint inlay so that it can fit inside of that chair seat and go around the two spindles that are around the sides. Now I'm going to mist my paper, and then I'm going to paint on the coat that I need on the seat of this chair so that I can lay down this entire inlay in that spot. Using a paint inlay of this size can be a little bit intimidating, but one of the things that hopefully will reassure you is that you can lift and lower that paint inlay a couple times before it fully adheres, and it will not in any way impact the actual design on the piece. So I am smoothing it down the same way that I do. If you think about it like decoupage paper, it kind of functions in a similar manner when you are laying it down on your piece. Once I have that down, I am going to mist it again on top of that paper and then wipe back or blot back some of the excess water and then set it aside to dry. I set this one aside to dry for a little over an hour, probably closer to 2, and now I am dampening it again, and then I'm going to reveal this amazing inlay. I use the same sheet to do the back of my chair, and I love how it has a similar pattern, but using pieces of the pattern makes it look slightly different. You'll see this on the bottom of the two chair rails that are on the back of the seat. To avoid any smudging, I did spray seal this, and then I sealed it with Big Top by DIY, and here it is. Absolutely stunning. Thank you so much for joining me today. Please let me know in the comments which project was your favorite, and let me know, are you trying to get through your IOD stash too? Because this week is the big reveal.